Hello, and welcome to another episode of Project PhDcast. I am your host still, Alison Innes. And today I want to discuss the rumors of the death of podcasting. And spoiler alert, they've been greatly exaggerated. As I began to talk with people about my podcasting interest and my research ideas, variations of the response, "But isn't podcasting over?" have cropped up and continue to crop up from time to time. I wasn't sure at first where this idea of podcasting being dead and over with was coming from. Certainly no one I knew in the podcasting sphere was saying this. But there have been a lot of rapid changes in the podcasting industry in the past few years, and I realized a lot of people seem to be conflating big names like Spotify with the podcasting scene as a whole. I've had a flurry of podcasting is dead articles cross my various news feeds in the past year, and particularly in the past month. So to discuss this further and to explore the place of independent creative podcasters in the shifting podcasting scene, I turned to one of my podcaster friends whose experience predates my own. My guest this episode is Christine Caccipuoti, a New York-based podcaster, historian, and performer. Christine is the co-producer of Footnoting History podcast and one of the first podcaster friends I met when I started my own podcasting adventures. She's been podcasting with the Footnoting History team since 2013 and has navigated the many changes to the podcasting landscape in the past decade. She's someone I've turned to for advice, discussion, and moral support, so I'm thrilled to bring you part of our conversation on the so-called death of podcasting. You can find links to Christine's website, her podcast, and the articles we mention in our conversation in the show notes. I hope you enjoy our conversation. So you are one of my earliest podcasting friends when I ventured down in the podcasting rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So that would have been 2016-ish that we have been friends. And we are always comparing notes and having debates and discuss. Well, not debates necessarily, but discussions.
Not really. No.
We're often in agreement on things, but So I wondered if maybe just to get us started, if you could tell us a little bit about how you got into podcasting and a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah, sure. So, as I was introduced, my name is Christine Caccipuoti. I've been a podcaster since February of 2013. So we're entering our 11th year in February with Footnoting History, which is so I say short form because it's roughly 30 minutes, and there are a lot of podcasts that go a lot longer these days. Podcast that airs every other week, and we cover interesting or different or undercovered, I should say, topics in history. There's 5 of us who rotate hosting duties, but 2 of us, which is myself and my co-producer Kristen, who run all of the kind of background administrative fun stuff. When I first got involved in Footnoting History, it hadn't launched yet. I was in there on the ground. It was not my idea, but I was invited to be a part of it from the beginning, and now I run it. So that's just how things evolved. But when it was first proposed, I didn't listen to podcasts. I knew what they were. They had been around for a while. They weren't as big as they are now in any stretch. Like we still had to explain to people what podcasts were all the time when we launched. But we knew what they were, especially in the history world, because at the time there were some big ones. The one that I think kind of sparked the creation idea was Stuff You Missed in History Class.
I remember that podcast. I used to listen to that one.
I had not listened to, but what I remember the origin story for the idea being was, these people are not historians and they're covering history, so why can't actual historians be the ones to do it? And that's kind of where we all came in, because we were all advanced degree holding or working towards advanced degree holding as historians at the time. So my kind of segue into podcasting is not, I think, what people's tends to be now. For me, I saw it as kind of a cool avenue to keep my foot in the history world because I didn't want to be a professor. So I was like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll do this. I'll keep doing my research. I'll put it out there. I'll feel like I'm sharing things that I think are great. But I was not somebody who got into it because I was an avid listener. Um, I still am probably I know I'm not as much of an avid listener to podcasts as you are. I listen to them, and I listen to them, and I keep my finger on the pulse of everything, but I definitely came to it through, like, a back door of, do first, become a fan later, which is not great. I don't recommend that. I definitely recommend, having some sort of podcast listening awakening before you do it, because I had to go and listen to a bunch to find out exactly what was expected in the world. Which at that time, again, it was still kind of like a new frontier where people were developing trends and things like that. So in that case, we were lucky because we could do whatever we wanted, which you can still do, but with less expectations of it taking off now than it was then.
Yes.
So that's kind of, yeah, it's a different world now. There's
Yeah.
formulas that people follow and things that people have tested and know succeed. And when we started, it was kind of like throw stuff at the wall and find your groove and do what you want with no expectation. We didn't expect anybody to listen, but they did, so that was nice. But yeah, so that's how I got into it. It was not a I listened to this, so I'm gonna go do it. It was oh wow, this is kind of a cool way to have me do this thing that I love without having to be in a classroom, because I did not want to be in a classroom. I still don't want to be a professor, so that has not changed. I much prefer this style because you can still interact with your listeners. It's just in a different way, and I don't have to grade anybody,
Definitely.
right?
Yep.
Which is nice. Nobody's getting a grade from me. They can listen if they want. If they don't want, I never know unless they tell me if they
Yep.
listen.
Yep.
So it's kind of cool. I see the numbers, but I'm not testing anybody. I'm not asking them to remember something. I'm not exposing them to something that they don't want to listen to, um, which all appealed to me over the idea of being a teacher. And obviously, I have nothing but respect for teachers and professors. Everybody else on my podcast is a professor or a teacher or has been at some point. It's just that that was not for me. So it was a good platform for me to switch over to stay in the history world, because there's not, unless you're like in a museum or at a historical site, it's being specifically in the field of history outside of academia, um, at the time was not as common as it is now. Because even that's growing with public history growing as a sphere in general.
And we should put a plug in here for your book, your edited volume,
Oh yeah, we could
in which I have a
yes,
chapter. So for
which you do
complete
have a chapter.
transparency,
Yeah,
but it's all about
we
how
did.
people. I think it's mostly history, humanities.
It's mostly his humanities. We do have
Yeah.
at least one science chapter, but it's Independent Scholars Meet the World. It was put out by University Press of Kansas in 2020, and it covers different aspects of ways that you can participate in your academic world without being a traditional academic professor or following any type of normal trajectory or so-called normal trajectory, right? Because everybody's trajectory is going to be different. But that whole concept of go to school, come out of school, become a professor is not for everybody. And you're seeing more and more people branch out. And so for me, it was podcasting, which is what I wrote about in that book. And then you wrote about your own journey.
Yep.
And we had a lot of great stories in there. And I think anybody who's even questioning whether they're in the right place, if they don't want to go the quote traditional route, can benefit from it and find something that will resonate, you know? So yeah, I mean, I'm gonna toot my own horn, but I think it's a good collection. And my chapter is only one chapter, so I'm not just talking about myself. But when I was reading the stories that people were submitting, it's not easy for people to say, I'm gonna talk about my struggles openly in a book that's going to be published by an academic press for a lot of people in academia to read about how I'm not a normal person in academia.
Well, and it was a peer-reviewed book. Like I found that a little bit of nervous. Like I'm going to write about the how parts of my academic journey really sucked, and I'm going to get that peer-reviewed. That was hard.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the things I appreciate about everybody and why I think it's a worthy read, because everybody who did it had to accept that essentially the people who have followed the trajectory that you did not follow are going to read this or can possibly read this, and it's important, I think, to have people talk like that, because when they do, it demystifies that situation. And I don't blame anybody for that. Like if you followed that traditional trajectory, that's great. That's what worked for you, but you're going to be working with students who might not be doing that, right? So you may as well know what's happening to people who, or what experiences people had who didn't go that way, to help you better help your students when they come to you. So I'm hoping that in addition to working for the people who are questioning their own trajectories, it'll help people who are in advisory positions,
Mm-hmm.
right? To understand, what are the access issues that you might have with somebody like that. So for me, the book was a no-brainer, right? It was something that I think was really important to talk about, and really important to get a variety of people's experiences, and people who went to different schools, people who had different majors, people who changed their trajectory at different points. Some people who were disappointed that they didn't go the traditional route, and others who were like me who knew they didn't want to do it. So there is something in there I think that anybody could at least find interesting and be like, oh wow, yeah, I never really thought about it from that person's perspective. Um, so I ended up, like I said, in podcasting, and other people end up in way different places than that. And it's really kind of cool to see what people had that stayed with them from their academic lives, and what people thought were problems, and reasons that they either felt they had to leave, or problems that they're encountering when they leave, but they still want to stay engaged in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, that's out there, and it's
Yep.
affordable. I promise. It's not
Yep.
one of those like $1 million books. We made sure that was the case because we wanted people to be able to read it.
Yep.
So you should all go and find it.
Yes. Links in the show notes.
Exactly. Thank you. Tooting our own horns.
If you
It's
ever
a
do
good book.
a second edition, I'll have to update my chapter because, of course, I wrote my
I know.
chapter long before I was even dreaming
Yeah.
of doing a PhD,
Yeah.
or doing a PhD in podcasting.
Yeah, but it's still interesting how things change,
Yeah.
because the changes now don't alter your experiences in the past,
No.
right? So no matter where anybody ended up or where they've ended up since that book came out, their experiences at that time were still valid, and still something that they happened to. So the changes later on really don't impact the validity of that book. I don't feel anyway.
Yeah. And certainly as a
It's all
contributor,
step.
I felt that reading, like when I finally got to read the book and see
Yeah.
everybody else's contribution,
Yeah.
I felt really validated because I wasn't
Right.
this kind of lone independent scholar. I
Oh,
was like, oh, there's lots, like I knew there were other independent scholars out there, but like
right. Right.
it gave me a connection that my story, like each story is unique, but there's commonalities in
Right.
them.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
independent, right? Even whether you're talking about podcasting or you're talking about academia and being a scholar, like the term independent kind of gets this stigma sometimes of like you're hiding in the shadows, and that's not fair, right? That's not fair, because just because you're not hooked up with something big or something traditional doesn't mean that your work is any less wonderful, or that what you're doing doesn't matter, or that you're not a part of that community. There are different ways, and with podcasting, independent was the only way at the beginning. Whereas and that like stigma came in kind of later, because originally you were just a podcaster. You weren't an independent podcaster. You're just a podcaster. With academia, independent was always kind of the fringe, but as that group is growing, it's becoming more acceptable, which it should have always been acceptable. But here we are. It's not a perfect world.
So I want to get into the podcasting
Yeah,
angle with you.
sure.
So I guess around the time that I was starting to apply for or think about applying for my PhD and that kind of thing, so kind of
Hmm.
in the past year or two, I started kind of occasionally hearing, like I'd mentioned somebody that to somebody that I was going to study podcasting or that I was doing
Hmm.
podcasting, and it was just like, oh, I thought podcasts were over, and I couldn't figure out where this attitude was
My
coming
heart.
from because it's definitely not over.
Right.
I'm listening to them, I'm making them, and I'd be kind of like, I don't know where you got that. And then kind of in the
Right.
past month or so, I noticed kind of what feels like a flurry of articles
Hmm.
about the end of podcasting, or is podcasting really dead? So you are the person I thought would be great to have on to discuss this because you've been around podcasting a lot longer than I have. So I shared some of those articles with you, and I'll put links
Yeah.
in the show notes so people can read these things and think about them.
Yeah.
And you and I know, have had a lot of discussions around what do we call ourselves. We've had
Mhm.
conversations around the term hobbyist, which I am very averse to.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts about people, podcasters like us, who are not, signed on to big name companies or even
Right.
podcast networks?
So I would never use the word hobbyist. I just wouldn't for me, but I understand that there are some people who do podcasting as a hobby. I think a lot of it comes from your intention, and what your show is, right? If I'm doing a show where my friends and I just decide that we're going to do it for kind of the sake of having a good time, and we're going to sit there and just enjoy ourselves, and maybe I'll say it's a hobby, right? I might be a little less intentional in what I'm putting out there. I might plan less. I might worry less and sleep better. I don't know. um, but I don't even mean that as like that it's something that requires less investment, because there are people who will say that it's a hobby, um, who do a ton of work for their podcast. But for me, as the way I am, I can't call it a hobby because I feel like it's a valid form of scholarship, and I can't view putting scholarship out into the world as a hobby, um, because I think it's too important to be a hobby. I just feel like if I if I was considering it a hobby, I would not care so much. I wouldn't have, lists of 10, 15 sources that I'm using for a 10-minute episode, you know? I just wouldn't do it because it's a hobby, so it'd be something that I did relaxing, like going and playing board games with my friends. Like, it's just not for me, that term doesn't apply, specifically to a lot of people in the history field, because there's so much research and so much work that has to go into building a product that people will respect for more than 2 seconds, you know? If I turn on a history podcast and somebody's, reading a Wikipedia article to me, that's not cool. So, for me, I don't use I just say podcaster. I don't even say indie podcaster because I don't really need that differentiation, and I've been doing it longer than a lot of the people who call themselves professional podcasters because they're with commercial companies. So, I don't feel like I need to earn my stripes, and I don't think that anybody needs to justify if they wanna call themselves a professional in this field.
Mm.
Um, I think they need to recognize that there's a learning curve. Like, if you had asked me the first year that Footnoting History came out, I would have been like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm an amateur. I have no clue. But at this point in time, I've been doing it for long enough. I feel like you kind of, when you become the professional,
Mm.
right? You become the professional to me when you can help somebody else, right? Because you've figured out what works, you know the ins and outs, you pay attention to things, you're able to help other people. You can call yourself a professional before. This is all personal. Like, this is my take on things. I don't expect my definitions to go for other people. But when I started to realize that I could help people who were starting, that I could answer their questions, that I could be a guest on their show and have a valuable conversation, I was like, I know a lot more about this than I thought I did. So I think when you hear topics like, "Oh, well, the podcast industry is failing," right? Or "The boom is over," I kinda look at it and I just laugh, because I'm like, You didn't even know we existed for, like, a decade, so you don't get to tell us that we're over."
Mm.
Um, I do think there was so a lot of these articles talked about Spotify, and like I was
Yes.
saying to you right before we started, Spotify didn't care about podcasts when we started out. Like, it was a later thing. We weren't on Spotify in the beginning because nobody was on Spotify because they weren't doing podcasts yet. Um, and I think the boom might be over for the monster companies who think that they're going to come in and toss a lot of money in and make a lot of money back. But also, it was in one of the articles. I don't remember which one it was, but I wrote it. I wrote a note about it. So where was it? It was basically. Oh, it was saying that. It was the article from The Verge, and it said that even though there were major layoffs in the podcasting world, saying that the golden years are over, listenership and ad revenue was actually up.
Yes, yes.
So,
I made that
yeah,
note as well. Is that on the one hand, there seems to be this popular or a sort of narrative that it's over, but the statistics are not lining up
right,
with that
exactly.
perception.
And then another one that I thought was really interesting was in the what article was this? This was the TechCrunch article. everything you know about podcasting industry is a lie. That was what it was called. That's not me
Yep.
saying that. Um, it basically
It's a good
said
title, though.
that yeah, it's a great title. It said that, Spotify, again, we're talking about Spotify. People keep going back to that, which again was not a giant when I started out, but they're talking about, again, canceling shows and layoffs, psych, signals that the boom is over. But then it went on to say that Spotify chose to then eventually make some of its shows Spotify exclusives with the hope of requiring people to then listen to it on Spotify and drive listeners there. If there's one thing that I know as a podcaster, it's you have to go where your audience is and opposed to waiting for your audience to come to you, because people have particular listening habits and particular places that they like to listen. And it's not a surprise that if you get pulled off of the platform that they listen to, that they don't necessarily follow. And that would be largely, in my opinion, because there are other things that can replace you. No matter
Mhm.
how good you are, I might not want to pay for another service, right?
Mhm.
So that article said that
That strategy
some
backfired
shows
on them.
that backfired hugely. Yeah, it said that some shows lost more than 75% of their audience. Well, yeah, because I mean, so saying Spotify saying like, oh, we have low numbers, well, even the article points this out, like, that wasn't on the hosts, right?
Yeah.
That's not on those shows. That's on the people who were in charge of handling those shows, who made those choices. So when you talk about is podcasting over, I don't know that I mean, first of all, it's not over. It's not over in the way that
Not as long
most
as we're around.
artistic formats are over. Well, it's one of those things like this, it's gonna be here, right?
Yeah.
It may not be the number one thing people are talking about, but it's gonna stick around just like radio is sticking around, or anything like vinyl having a resurgence, right? Like, people will always continue to do it. It just may not be in the mainstream. And it wasn't in the mainstream before. So for the people who weren't trying to do the kind of like get rich quick, take advantage of the bubble, throw a lot of money at famous people and hope that that gets your money back, it not a lot has really changed. I mean, in terms of creation, right? Nobody's stopping me from creating. Nobody's stopping you from creating.
There's the quote from Ira Glass in the Vanity Fair article that I really liked, where he just says, "Leave the cool out of it." Like, we were into podcasting
Yeah.
before it was cool, and those of us who were into it then, and when it was really niche, and we're still into it,
Yeah.
and we're still doing it, and like, who cares if it's cool or not? But just back to
Yeah.
what the TechCrunch article was saying, and I think this came up in a couple of the other articles as well, is this idea that these big decisions were being made by kind of corporate offices who had
Mhm.
no finger on the pulse of the actual podcasting world, and they bought up a lot of these companies that I remember listening to, like Gimlet is
Yeah.
one that comes to mind right away, with
Yeah.
Spotify especially, or Anchor, like all these different companies. They bought them up, and
Mhm.
now in the past year or so, a lot of those have been closed down and laid off, and it's kind of heartbreaking when you think about the work that people did, that independent for lack of a better word,
Mhm.
podcasters did to kind of build up those networks and then sell them on, and then just to see them kind of collapse would be very discouraging in one way. But I also kind of see it like Ira Glass, like, who cares? We can continue
Yeah.
doing what we're doing with or without these big companies and their decisions.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I remember a couple of well, it was pre-pandemic, so probably talking about 2018, 2019. I met a girl who was in college, and I don't remember her name because it was a while ago. And she was telling me how she was kind of inventing her own major at her college, working with an advisor or whatever, because she wanted to go into podcasting as her major. And I was super interested right away, right? I was like, "What are you talking? Like, how do you mean, whatever?" And her whole thing was, it was a way to make money, and it was she just wanted to be the person who, like, greenlit podcasts. And I was like, "Okay, so have you ever made a podcast before?" "No." "Okay. What do you know about podcasting?" "Well, I know that they're popular." She was like, "It's not up to me to come up with the ideas. All I have to do is say, like, yeah, that would be a good one." And I was like, "This is not gonna go well." Like, I mean, for her sake, I hope it goes well, right? Because she was very nice and she was very enthusiastic, and I loved how she wanted to work in the podcasting world. But I feel like if you're getting into it without knowing anything about the audiences, you have no experience in it at all, it's kind of like, how do you know you're making the right decisions? what I mean, hopefully over her course of her studies, she got all that. Like, hopefully that was in there, that was in her program as she built it up. But I just thought about it, and I remember thinking, "Oh gosh, like, what do we do?" And they talk about that with Spotify, like you're saying, right? These are people who did not know. They didn't understand what was causing things to build up. And having a name at the head of your podcast does not guarantee things. And I think one of my biggest disappointments with the growing commercialization was how little value they saw in kind of offering to invest in pre-existing shows.
Hmm.
I mean, there are a couple that happened, I'm sure, over time, but so much of it was like, we're just going to throw these people on the podcasts and like hope for the best, instead of taking ones that already had established themselves in the what now became the indie community, but had originally just been the community, and kind of seeing what worked with them and helping them grow. Because if you were making a name in podcasting before the commercial era, you were doing something good,
Hmm.
right? Because you didn't have any money behind you pushing things.
It was
You had to
organic.
earn those. Yeah, it was super, super organic, and then they tried to almost put a formula on it, right? Throw lots of money, put it on a celebrity, have them, I don't know, have them, recap a show that they were in, have them interview a certain demographic of people or a one specific topic or whatever thing that they were associated with, from their careers. And don't get me wrong, like some of that stuff's really interesting. I listened to Drama Queens, the recap show of One Tree Hill. It's not that I think that these things don't have value at all. It's that I don't think just throwing money at the wall is going to fix anything or be sustainable. People only have a certain amount of time to listen to things. They have to make their choices. They also only have a certain amount of money to spend, which is why I think people didn't follow those Spotify exclusives to Spotify, right?
Well, the Slate
Like,
article brings this up as well, right? The shift
yep,
towards the celebrity interview. So rather
yep.
investing money in good storytelling, which is a whole
Yep.
other
There's
topic of
different genres,
conversation that
basically.
comes up in
Yeah,
these
for
articles,
sure.
but rather than investing money in the journalism, in the creating of good, strong stories, of just relying on that celebrity cachet. And I mean, we saw what happened
Right.
with the Prince Harry and Meghan Markle podcast that never
Mhm.
materialized, or the Barack Obama uh, podcast that I don't think materialized. But somebody will fact check me on
Well,
that.
Meghan
But
Markle had one. She had one but just didn't last,
yeah, so like
right? She had the one where she
Spotify.
interviewed all the women,
Yeah. Yes.
but it
Yes.
didn't stay. There's
Yeah.
there's no staying power for these
Yeah.
things.
Spotify had some really big deals with some of these celebrities that just kind of, there was either one or two shows or like a handful of shows, and then it just kind of fizzled, right? And so I think that there's something kind of interesting going on there with that celebrity angle, that somehow we want, like, they're relying on that celebrity bringing their fans to the podcast, rather than trying to connect with the podcast listening community and really tap into what people want. I think. I don't know. What do you
Yeah.
think?
No, so I love a celebrity interview. I love acting, I love actors, and so I
You
will,
are an
if I
actor.
have
I should
well,
mention that
I
too.
do, yeah. I love that world. So, I will seek out interviews of people that I love, but the downside to that is I don't go back.
Mm,
So so if you're interviewing somebody that I love, I'll go and I'll listen to that episode, but that doesn't make me become somebody who then listens to that podcast all the time. It means I'll go back when somebody else I like is gonna be on it. Like, that's my listening style, right? If I'm looking for a podcast that's interviewing somebody, that's kind of the way it works in the celebrity interview world for
mhm,
me. It's the same thing with, like, late night talk shows. Like, I don't follow any late night talk shows. I'm just not my thing. I know people who watch the same one every night and they love it. Not for me. But if I hear that somebody that I am interested in is going to be on it, then I will watch it. But I think with podcasting, you kinda see that a lot, the picking and the choosing. Um, and part of that's because there's just so much content out there, and you and I have talked about this kind of off recording in the past, of kind of this podcast graveyard, right?
mhm,
Where I just double checked, Meghan Markle's Archetypes podcast was officially canceled, which I thought, but it was there. But that still exists, right? So most podcasts, if a person wants, can stay out. So you can dump your money into a pod, interview 10 really huge people, cancel the podcast, and then still have people finding that and continue to do it. The podcast graveyard is, all these shows, and this is a term from way before the boom of right now, that just kind of exist out there in the ether but are no longer being updated.
Mm-hmm.
And
I might know one or two myself.
and there's nothing wrong with people wanting to keep visibility. I understand that from the perspective of those creators, but the fact that it just keeps growing and
Mm.
growing and growing means that it takes a longer time for newer ones to be found that are being updated more, because the choices, right? Like, the
Yeah.
choices.
Yeah, and
So many choices.
I know you like you said, you and I have talked about this before, and I know we disagree slightly. I've kept Myth Take up. Our last episode was 2020. People are still finding it, and people are still listening to it. And I think as long
Yeah.
as people continue to find it and listen to it, I'm going to leave it there. And as long as I can
No,
afford to keep paying for it.
But I think that they should be there. I understand that from that side. I agree with the creator side of wanting to keep it up there. If we stop Footnoting History tomorrow, I would keep it up for as long as I could. I think from a search perspective,
Mm-hmm.
it can make things murky, right?
I
Like,
think of it like a library.
right.
So Myth Take, and then once we finish wrapping up Forward, the season of Forward, like they're like big, 30 chapter 50, they're massive books in the library that people can go and consult. But then, as you've just pointed out, there's nobody curating the library. Like anybody can put anything into that library, and then you're sifting through. And then of course you get like the aborted shows that are like there's 2 episodes or there's 3 episodes when somebody realized, oh crumb, this is a lot more work than I thought, and they're still floating around there out in
Right.
the
Like,
ether too.
I don't categorize like a full complete show, whatever that looks like for the creator, in the same way as I categorize, somebody did 2 episodes and then just left and it's still coming up because the name was catchy. Like,
Mm-mm.
basically my dream is like and some podcasting place that I don't use might have this, but none of the ones that I use do, is to search and be able to say, like, was this updated in the last year, or is it an archive? Because I'll still listen to it if I know it's an archive, but I want to know what I'm getting myself into, and I want to be
Mm.
able to make that choice in an educated way.
So do you think, and this is a bit of a leading question because I think I know what your answer is already, but do you think the days of in your case, Footnoting History, in my case, Myth Take Forward, this podcast, Project PhDcast, showing up on the recommended for you page are over? Are those days over of the indie podcasters getting the front page of the podcast internet? Or are they all going to be big
So,
names with a lot of money behind them?
so one of the interesting things I think about that is, for a long time, nobody ever knew how that happened, right? At least I remember when we first started, like, Apple and iTunes was not releasing how they determined what was in those sections, what caused it to be number one, what caused something to be number 10, when they would have the top 200, so they still have. And when we started, we were consistently in the top. And now, even though our numbers are still really good, there are so many things that came in and started to bump us down. Like, lore came in and started to bump us down. Other types of just like the bigger shows. What was the one that was around the same time? Serial wasn't the same category as us, but there were a bunch that came up kind of at the same time in that like boom of the history market. And I don't know what causes these rankings, but I do think you have to have something that's viral
Mm.
to have that happen, and that does happen. You can see indie podcasts that do take off, and they do really well, um, but I think it's less common for that to happen now. I do think it's much harder to break to the top now. Um, I don't want to say that it's impossible, because it will depend. It'll depend on when those big shows end. Are they allowed to fall down in the rankings?
Mm.
Because you did used to see, and I haven't tracked it as much as I used to in our beginning days, you did used to see that your number would go up when you released,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, but then all of a sudden you would see some show that hadn't been out in 2 years that was suddenly in number 14th. So I really don't know. I still, and this isn't one of the things too, actually, podcast analytics are a disaster.
Yes. 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 And I wish it's like there's so little information. Like you get downloads, you depending on your podcast hosting, you might get ideas of how far into the episode people have listened, how many people,
Mhm,
or completion of the episode.
mhm,
You get a geographic sense of where they are,
mhm.
what platform, like if they're on Apple or Google or Play, and that's obviously been phased out. But but you don't really get much of an in-depth sense of who's really listening
Right.
necessarily, and it's different on every platform. So like I'm hosting
Yep.
on I've hosted on Podbean. This podcast right
That's what we're
now,
on now.
I'm hosting on WordPress,
Mhm.
just to experiment with it because I'm like, well, I should
Right.
know how this works in case anybody asks me
Yeah,
how
no,
this
for
works.
sure.
But I'm not going to be able to compare those
Right.
statistics, right? Because they're two completely
Yeah.
different environments, and they're
Yeah.
going to count their statistics differently.
Yeah, we started off, back in the day on FeedBurner,
Oh,
which tells you how old we are.
I don't think I've ever heard
That
of
there
that
you
one.
go. There you go. I don't think it exists
Yeah.
anymore. We switched over however long into our time. I mean, years, I could probably find out, let me see. So 2018, we switched over. So about actually halfway through, because it was our 5th year, we switched over, and, you know, I don't know what those numbers, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, we had nothing else to go by, so to us, they were right. Um, Podbean's numbers, because when we switched over to Podbean, it wasn't like it picked up those numbers and continued to
No,
start
and
us from
that's
0.
the other thing. I moved MythTake to Acast, but then I realized
Mhm.
if I deleted the Podbean feed for MythTake, I was going to lose all those listeners, like all and
Right.
all of those stats. So I now have it in both places, which feels a little excessive, but anyway.
No, I when we switched it, we did pull it. We did eventually pull it from the original place, but I because I'm anal retentive, I have all of these screenshots of all of our
Mm,
numbers from the day that we switched, because I was like, we're never gonna have, any other indication, right? So, I mean, I have no idea kind of, and I have no real reason to think that those numbers were wrong in any with any more degree of fallibility than, say, any other person's,
mhm.
right? Because we were not the only podcast on that platform, we weren't making it up ourselves. So when I look at, like, our total numbers now, I kind of look at the Podbean number and then add it to what those numbers were for the last day that we were in the other place, and that's where I get our total numbers from,
Mhm.
because that's really the only way to do it. Otherwise, just accept that you didn't have anything before then, which is ridiculous, because of course you did.
Yeah, and this is something interesting that I'm finding. So my PhD is on podcasting, but it's in the field of
Right,
digital humanities. And like one of the
right.
challenges, and I was discussing this with my supervisor as well, is like the podcasts I'm looking at, like they're not static, right? Like those numbers or the
Right.
comments on them are going to change, or they might
Yep.
disappear completely. Somebody might pull them. Like
Mhm.
there's kind of this really ephemeral sense, and
Mhm.
we kind of, I don't know, my generation, we were told anything you put on the internet is there forever, but it's kind of not.
Right.
and
Right.
and
Yeah.
that same thing that same idea applies to podcasts. Like if you pull it and you lose all your you lose your stats, you lose your
Mhm.
website, like it's almost as though it never happened.
Right. And it's even to, like, not, this is not so much ephemeral, but, like, what counts as a listen changes,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So they were talking in the article about, it was the Verge article, that, Apple Podcasts is no longer gonna automatically download podcasts for you if you haven't listened in a certain period of time or if you're running out of space. Okay, well, that, and they argue that that's actually a good thing, because you're gonna get more accurate data of who's really listening, but nobody likes to see their numbers go down.
No, no. Well,
I
and
understand it, but
and
the
as a
bump is hard.
listener, like, and again, this is just my personal listening habits. I
Mhm.
follow a lot of podcasts now, and I had to let go a long time ago. I learned You don't have to
Yeah.
listen to every episode of every podcast. And I mean, there
Right.
are
Which you
some
don't.
that I do, but I like seeing them in my feed. I decide whether or not I want to
Right.
listen to that episode. If my feed isn't showing me, like if I haven't listened and my
Yep.
feed isn't showing me those ones that I've
Mhm.
missed, and I don't think to go and look at the
Mhm.
podcast's feed, I'm never like I kind of feel like the choice is being taken away from me as a listener.
Right.
Like
Well, it is.
I've subscribed to that podcast because I want to know what they're putting out, whether or
Right.
not I listen
Like,
to everything.
that's what subscription is, right?
Yes.
I want it to come to me,
so so
right?
so it's
Because
kind
I
of
was
like
even thinking,
Apple
yeah,
deciding what, like they're kind of changing the meaning of what it means to subscribe to a podcast.
right. They're saying you didn't listen to it enough, which is
Yeah.
so I was looking at it, it said if you haven't listened in 15 days. So we release every 14 days. What does that mean?
If you miss one
Does it,
episode,
right, that's my point, right?
yeah.
So like I
Or what
mean,
if you release once a month? How's that going to work?
right. That's what I'm saying.
Like
And
this one,
we
this
release more than some other people.
yeah, this
There are gonna be
podcast only once a month.
some people are just gonna be constantly seeing their numbers drop because nobody knows they've released anything because their subscriptions have stopped.
Mm,
Um, so while I mean, I could see putting in the option to turn it off. You know, like somebody might say, well, if I haven't listened to it in 15 days, it's not worth it to me. I'm going to turn off the auto download after that point. Almost like how on your phone you can say like cut it off after a certain number of text messages or let it keep building,
yeah.
right? Same kind of a concept. But it may be more accurate for stat purposes, but to me, I don't know. Even the interest of having it auto downloaded is important.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also like we were saying, I was pointing out like the change in what it means to be a download, right? It kind of reminds me of the rise of music streaming and the rise of TV streaming, changing what counts for record sales. How do you become a number one? It used to be actual sales. Now it's like number of listens, and it's a lot easier to. And I don't mean this in any disrespect to any fandoms, because I would have done the exact same thing if it was around when I was younger. Um, Being able to flood something by just playing it over and over and over again,
Hmm.
right? Where because you already pay for your subscription, then you can just keep playing it. But in my old person days, you had to actually buy it,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, teenage me would have 1000% picked my favorite artists and just played their songs over and over again if it was going to help something. But teenage me could not go out and buy 500 copies of the CD,
Yeah.
right? So it's just different metrics and things are changing and what it means to be, a number one is changing. And I saw one of the articles was saying that like Spotify was measuring kind of success based on how many people who listened to a podcast then became Spotify subscribers. And I was like, well, that's not going to be how I measure my success.
No.
Like these companies have totally different missions and visions than what we of the quote indie community would have. Mine is like, people listen. That's great. That makes me happy.
And there you have it. That is just a snippet of the conversation that Christine and I had. I really enjoyed chatting with her. We talked for almost 2 hours. So I will bring more of that conversation to you in the future. And I'm sure I'll be talking with her again as well. I really enjoyed our conversation about independent scholarship and podcasting as it ties in with my last episode on the scholarly identity or the academic identity. And I think a lot about what we call ourselves and how we identify ourselves, particularly in this field of scholarly podcasting that's not necessarily tied to a traditional academic institution. As well. So lots of good food for thought there and themes that I will no doubt return to. And yeah, I think I'm going to start calling myself a professional podcaster. I've been reluctant to embrace the name, but maybe it's time that I follow Christine's lead and start embracing it. Thank you to everyone who got in touch with me following our last episode. I had some great feedback and some good conversations with some of my colleagues who had lots to say about academic identity, and I really enjoyed that. So feel free to get in touch. Let me know what you think. And if you've got questions or you want to be a guest on the podcast, feel free to check out my website. You can get in touch with me through there. And I will see you again in about a month's time for another conversation.